I've been thinking a lot about diagnoses, and I thought we'd kind of just toss around some ideas about that today. Is a diagnosis helping us to find out what's going on with our bodies, or is it simply labeling us and keeping us stuck? I asked myself this. I haven't really been diagnosed with anything over the years, and I'll just call it like my stomach issues. And it's interesting because when you start talking to people, it's like we want these like concrete answers. Like people be like, "Well, what's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Well, I have like digestive issues." And they're like, "Oh, well, like, have you just like tried this thing?" And I'm like, "Yeah, and it can be frustrating to not have a diagnosis. I think partially because of the identity of it, or feeling like at points when it was pretty bad, especially, I felt like I wasn't like legitimized, like, oh, well, you haven't been diagnosed with anything, so there's not really anything wrong with you. And I think that's maybe one reason why a lot of us want to go for getting a diagnosis. Well, let me just not speak to other people, but I think, I understand searching for getting a diagnosis because it confirms to us that what we're feeling is real. And on the other side, not getting a diagnosis when you feel like crap is like, well, there's nothing wrong with you. And I've heard this so much, and I feel so much for so many of us who have gone to, doctors or practitioners of whatever type, and they're really focusing on getting a diagnosis for something very concrete and specific. Especially our healthcare system now is, designed around specialists. So you go to specialists who are just looking at certain parts of your body and might not be able to get you this concrete diagnosis. And then they'll be like, well, there's nothing wrong with you, and in their eyes, or in the very specific ways of diagnosing us with certain ailments, they're right. And we know that something's going on with us because we don't feel well, right? So I'm just asking myself, like, would it have been good for me? Like, now I definitely don't feel like I need any kind of diagnosis. I think mainly because I have been able to heal myself in a fairly holistic way over a long period of time. And I think that that's probably what my body needed. I did go to a gastroenterologist for a while, and we did, like, the other part of this is tests. And I think testing with or without a diagnosis, or testing to point us towards the measurements that we use testing is the measurements that we use to point us in the direction of something that needs support in our systems, right? Or something that's going on in our systems. So I think that can be really huge. I went to a gastroenterologist at one point, and we did an ultrasound to look at all of my organs and make sure they were all functioning properly, and there wasn't like tumors or anything that you'd be able to see on an ultrasound. And that was a really good thing to do. It's like, let's rule out anything major that, that's easily done with an ultrasound. And then he could tell just by touching my abdomen that I had inflammation in my intestines. And he wanted to do a colonoscopy to see if it was the small intestine or the large intestine. And, that's pretty invasive, like semi-expensive. And I was kind of like, what would come out of the colonoscopy? Like, if we find out it's my large intestine or my small intestine, how is that going to change the way that we treat my body and the path that it leads us down? And it didn't really seem to make much of a difference. Like they're part of the same system, and from what I gathered, at least at the time, he wasn't going to change much about my treatment. So it was like, okay, well then, like, let's just treat it holistically, right? So as I say that, I realize, in asking myself, when would I feel like I need a diagnosis? And when can I be okay with simply, treating my body holistically and healing, the whole system, and hoping that that's going to, take care of whatever issues are going on, right? And I think one of the major things for me is, if the diagnosis is going to change my course of action, meaning, am I going to treat my body like the way that the treatments that I do for my body, or protocols or therapies, are they going to be different if I get this diagnosis versus this diagnosis, or if I can prove that I have this thing going on in my body? And I also then started thinking about, there are different types of diagnoses, right? Some are genetic. We say, oh, this is genetic. Genetic ailments point to a specific gene mutation or difference in your genes. So that should, I think, be pretty easy to know. And I think sometimes we say genetic, and what we really mean, or maybe we're lumping like genetic and hereditary under the same umbrella. And hereditary, if I think about like inheritance, it's something that, yes, maybe you're inheriting from the people you grew up with, typically your parents, but could be your grandparents, could be your aunts and uncles, could be the people you live with. So hereditary is not the same thing as genetic, and it's not necessarily something that can't be changed. If my mom has a disease, and I also have that disease, well, what kind of disease is it? Is it coming from a behavioral thing? Is it, excess processed foods, or living in a particularly toxic environment, or specifically toxic environment? Is it coming from stress, trauma, inherited, ancestral trauma, wounds? There's a lot of things that we can inherit from our family members and loved ones that don't necessarily mean that that you can't change them. And in fact, over the years, over the last few decades, science, medical science has found that much, much, much fewer diseases are actually, part of who we are, DNA, or like on a cellular level. And the vast majority of them are changeable, if you will. So yeah, and then there's a lot of diagnoses that are symptoms-based or behavioral, right? From what I know, like ADD, ADHD, the way that they diagnose it, and autism, I think, I'm sorry if I'm like saying this wrong. I have not done a whole lot of research on this, but in my generation, there's a lot of us who are ADD, ADHD, and that they are diagnosed based on behaviors. So they see the same behavioral patterns, and then they say that they give you this diagnosis. Or symptoms related, IBS, like irritated bowel syndrome. You get the diagnosis of IBS if your bowels are irritated. like that's a symptom-based thing. So I think these diagnoses, again, can point us in the right direction. And I think where, for myself, a diagnosis would be really helpful is when it's opening a door to a direction, like it's pointing me in a direction where I can look for the deeper cause that's going on with my body. I'll use the ferritin as an example. I did some blood work recently. So the main symptom that I went to the doctor for was hair loss. When I moved to France, I really started having like kind of wild hair loss, and it was freaky. And I went to the doctor, and so she said, okay, here, we're going to do a whole bunch of tests. She ordered a bunch of, great tests that I was happy to have because I was curious about these specific things too, thyroid, hormone levels, some things like that. And one of them was stored iron or ferritin. And the numbers came back quite low for me. And so the doctor said, start supplementing ferritin, and we'll retest in 3 months and see if your levels have gone up. And at first I'm like, great, this is an easy fix. Like I was so glad to see that, because losing hair is scary. And you don't just grow it back from one day to the next. It's not like, oh, we found out what was going on with you, and so like you're gonna have all your hair back in 2 days or 2 weeks or even 2 months. Like it takes a long time to grow hair back. And so I was excited to find that I had low ferritin, and I was like, great, we're going to start with the supplements and like, let's get this thing moving. And then I realized, okay, well, actually information started coming to me about minerals and mineral balancing, which I don't know anything about. I'm just starting to research it, and we'll definitely talk about that more. But so copper is needed in order for your body to absorb, move, and use ferritin or iron productively, effectively in the system. But I started thinking, okay, why are my iron levels low? Okay, yes, let's supplement with iron, which would solve the problem of if I'm not getting enough iron, right? Like if I'm not taking in enough iron, which mostly we get iron from the foods we eat. So, okay, I could get iron from foods, or I could supplement iron. So I'm doing that, but it also could be, am I losing iron? Am I not taking enough in? Am I absorbing the iron, or maybe my body's not absorbing it well? Am I using and being able to move the iron in my system well? Like these are all potential reasons why ferritin levels would be low. And so if I'm taking supplements, that's only addressing one of the potential reasons. Think of a leaky bucket. So this is how I started thinking about it. If I have a bucket and it has a leak in it, the leak is my body leaking ferritin or iron. You're going to notice when the levels are low, when you do a test and it says the levels are low. And so if I have this leaky bucket and the water's coming out, but I just keep pouring more water in, which is me pouring more ferritin into my body. If I just keep pouring more water in, I may never notice that it's a leaky bucket, because I just continue to put water in, and I'm putting enough water in that when it's dripping out, it's just not making, it's not showing, because the water levels aren't going down in the leaky bucket. So the thing with supplementing, just an immediate supplementation of, if we take tests and we see, okay, you have low iron, you have low B12, you have, low estrogen. And then we're just like, okay, let's just like pour some estrogen in there. Let's pour some B12 in there. It is helping with the immediate issue, potentially, if your body can actually use that iron or B12 or whatever. But it's not getting rid of the leak, because the numbers, the tests, and the diagnoses often are pointing towards, their measurements, they're pointing towards something that's going on in the body. So, for instance, I only just recently started researching about what it means to have high cholesterol. I'm like, we hear this all the time. Oh, I have high cholesterol. So yeah, I take this thing to lower my cholesterol, which is like just lowering a number. But it's like, what is going on in the body? What is cholesterol? Why does my body need it? And what does it mean when I have high cholesterol? And what is happening in the body? And what could be causing that? So again, as I start to think about, do I need diagnoses? Would it have made a difference for me at different times in my healing journey to have a diagnosis? When now am I going to seek out a diagnosis in the future, on this long, journey that is life when I have health ailments? And I think it will be one when I think that the diagnosis will change my habits or actions and the way that I treat my healing. And two, when it's going to point me in a direction and open this door to more research and more being able to discover what could really be going on in my body. So that's when I'm going to seek diagnoses. And when I'm going to get tests done. And I'm also going to ask myself, what kind of diagnosis is this? Is this genetic? Is it something that's happening in my genes? And if so, what does that mean? What does that look like? This is science. I don't know what these things mean. I need to go and do the research, which is so exciting about the time that we live in, and how we can understand what is happening in our bodies. Is this diagnosis hereditary? And if so, could it potentially be based on, behaviors or environments that can be changed so that I can change my diagnosis, literally? And same with symptomatic. Is it symptomatic or behavioral diagnosis where a doctor or practitioner is diagnosing me based on the symptoms I have or the behaviors I exhibit? And if so, then by, presumably by changing the symptoms or, relieving the symptoms or changing the behaviors, I can presumably change my diagnosis, So not allowing myself to get too identified with the diagnosis. And even as I'm saying this, I hear it's like I said, my stomach issues and my, gut problems and my, hair loss. And so the other piece of especially diagnosis is, are we holding on to that diagnosis as a label? Are we identifying ourselves with it? Is having, a diagnosis, is it closing that door and it's just like, okay, yep, I know what's wrong with me. I have this diagnosis. Now I know what's wrong with me, and I'm going to carry it with me throughout my life as this label, as this excuse, as this opportunity to be as this excuse or as this, I'm just thinking about, how over the years when I wasn't really able to tell people that I had been diagnosed with anything because people would ask. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, and they're just like, oh, well, like, I don't know, like, take some antacids or probiotics or whatever, like it was an easy fix. Yeah, so the question that I'm contemplating and that I invite you to contemplate for yourself is, what is the diagnosis that you have had providing for you? Has it opened a door for you to going deeper in understanding what's going on with your body so that you can treat it and heal it? Is a diagnosis a safe label that's allowing you to feel validated? Is it an excuse to not keep working on yourself? I don't know, what would a diagnose, and if you haven't been diagnosed and you're, what would have you, why would that be useful for you? Yeah, I think we, have really focused a lot on getting people diagnosed in the more recent history, and not really talking about what that actually means for what's happening in the body. So, some food for thought for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.